Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Books of Blood Volume 2 by Clive Barker. Now, Books of Blood is a 6-volume collection of short stories written by Clive Barker and published between the years 1984 and 1985. Now, I already reviewed Volume 1 of Books of Blood back in 2017, and I'll leave a link in the description below to where you can check out that review. Now, Clive Barker is perhaps most famous for writing the book The Hellbound Heart, which was adapted into the movie Hellraiser, which of course kickstarted the Hellraiser film franchise. But it was really this 6-volume anthology that made Clive Barker famous and got the attention of people like Stephen King, Ramsey Campbell, and Alan Moore. Now, my copy of Books of Blood Volume 2 was actually signed by Clive Barker. I had the pleasure of meeting him last year, and actually right behind me is a picture of me with Clive Barker. There's me looking like a complete doofus next to a living legend. Now, Clive Barker is British, and I don't know if the EC horror comics were available in the UK when Barker was a kid or not, but some of the stories in this particular volume of Books of Blood honestly have a real EC feel to them. Like, a lot of the stories in here deal with really bad people getting their comeuppance in really ironic and gruesome ways, and a lot of them really do feel like classic EC stories, but again, I'm not sure if EC Comics was an influence on Clive Barker or not. Now, doing this review with me will be my friend Mark Allan Gunnells, who is actually an author himself, and frequently throughout the video it will cut back and forth between me and him.
Hello. My friend Christian has asked me to do a short review on Clive Barker's The Books of Blood Volume 2. This is actually an omnibus edition I have that collects the first 3 volumes into one. I think Clive Barker's The Books of Blood are some of the best short stories I've ever read. His short fiction is bold and daring, unusual, often balances that line between eroticism and just grotesque, but it truly is some of the most unique fiction I've ever read. And I think that's why it got everyone's attention when they first came out. The first volume has, hands down, one of my favorite short stories of all time, In the Hills, the Cities. But I'm going to talk about Volume 2, and I'm going to mention briefly each of the stories in that volume.
The first story in this collection is Dread, a rare non-supernatural story from Barker. Basically, the story is about a young college student named Steve who becomes acquainted with an older classmate named Quaid, who is obsessed with the concept of dread. And what happens is, one day Quaid kidnaps a classmate of theirs who's a vegetarian and keeps her hostage in a room for a number of days with absolutely no food except for a piece of meat, the one food that she would not eat. And then Quaid decides to try his little experiment on Steve, and that's all I want to say about the plot of this story, but this is a very good story. Like, it's a really good psychological horror story. Now, this was also adapted into a 2009 film of the same name. I've never seen the movie, so I can't comment too much on it, but here are Mark's thoughts on Dread.
It starts off with a story called Dread, which I think is a great story to start the collection with. It's the tale of these college kids who are doing this experiment with having people face their fears with the things that they fear the most. And it goes to some very dark, visceral places. There's nothing really supernatural in this story, which is kind of rare for his short fiction, but it shows you just how dark human beings can be. I think it is a fantastic story.
The next story featured in this collection is called Hell's Event. Basically, this is about a marathon that's happening, and the devil sends one of his demons to Earth in human form to participate in this marathon, and basically, if the demon wins, it will be the end of the world as we know it. Basically, Satan will rule the Earth for all eternity. And in the story, there's a politician who's secretly in cahoots with the devil, who's going to stop at nothing to make sure that this demon wins. But this was a very good story. It was creepy, but also darkly humorous as well. And it also has sort of this darkly ironic ending that really does feel like something out of EC Comics. Again, I'm not sure if those comics were an influence on Barker or not, but the ending of this story would have felt right at home in a Tales from the Crypt or Vault of Horror comic. And Barker really does play with expectations with this story, because there's a character who I thought was going to end up being the hero of the story, and he really isn't. Like, something happens to him that I was not expecting at all. But here are Mark's thoughts on Hell's Event.
The next story is Hell's Event, which is about a race and a demon that is taking part in the race. The outcome of the race is very important. If the demon wins, Hell will rule Earth. There's almost a certain humor to this story, especially, how the person who wins the race ends up winning. I won't give too much away, but I think it's a very fun and, again, original story.
Now, my favorite story in the collection is Jacqueline S., Her Will and Testament, and out of all the stories in here, this is the one that feels the most quintessential Clive Barker. What I mean by that is a common theme that you see throughout Barker's work is this connection between sex and horror, sex and the supernatural. Like, he combines horror with eroticism, and his stories are known for being very sexually transgressive. Now, what the plot of this story is, it's about a woman who, following a suicide attempt, discovers that she has these strange powers. She has the power to literally transform other people's bodies. And after quote-unquote accidentally killing her husband with these powers, she starts hooking up with other men. And with these powers, she can transform these men's bodies as well as her own in order to achieve the ultimate sexual experience. The issue is, this ultimately results in either death or the man becoming hopelessly obsessed with her. But this was a really good story. I mean, it's a very grotesque story. Like, it's pure body horror. Like, David Cronenberg would be proud of this story. Yet it's strangely beautiful at the same time, and also very sad and tragic. Jacqueline actually reminded me a lot of the character of Julia from The Hellbound Heart, although I personally found Jacqueline to be far more sympathetic. And the story definitely has a feminist undercurrent, where it's about a woman who wields this power over men, yet nearly every man she encounters wants to control that power in some way. There's only one male character in the story who does seem to respect Jacqueline's powers, and that's where the story does kind of become almost like a tragic love story. But you could also look at the story as sort of a commentary on relationships, because I think in every relationship, regardless of which sex you are, you find things about your partner that you don't particularly like and that you would like to change, and this takes that to a literal extreme. But again, this is a fantastic story. They were actually going to do a movie based on this with Lena Headey, who people might recognize from Game of Thrones and Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles, but unfortunately the movie never came to fruition. Here are Mark's thoughts on Jacqueline S., Her Will and Testament.
Jacqueline S., Her Will and Testament. This is a story about a woman who has the power to, with just the power of her mind, mutate and transform other people's bodies. And she starts using this for erotic pleasure for men, even though the ultimate result is death. It's a very, again, it's one of those stories where it's erotic, it's grotesque, and that's sort of the thing that Clive Barker, especially in his early days, really liked to explore, and I think he does it very well here. They were once going to make this into a film, but it sort of fell apart. And going back, Dread was turned into an independent film, which, if you can find it, is really great.
So, the next story in the collection is called The Skins of the Fathers, and basically this one begins where a guy's car breaks down in the middle of the desert, and he looks off in the distance and sees what looks like a procession or parade. And from a distance, the people in this parade look like they're wearing costumes, but upon closer inspection, this guy realizes that this is a procession of actual monsters. And these monsters are heading towards this small town because a few years prior, it turns out they actually mated with a human woman and impregnated her, and now they want to claim their son. That's all I want to say about the plot of this story, but this was a really interesting one, and it's one of those stories where you're kind of left to wonder who the real monsters are, because it seems like these monsters really just want to do their thing and be left alone, and it's really the townspeople who keep fucking with them. And even when they mated with this woman, it really wasn't a rape. Like, she was a little scared at first, but eventually she accepted it. So again, you're kind of left to wonder if the monsters in the story are really evil, because whenever they kill humans in this story, it's only when they're defending themselves. And the story is also kind of a critique of masculinity and that sort of overly macho attitude, which is what gets the human characters in trouble in the story. And in a lot of ways, this story felt like an early precursor to Barker's novel Cabal, which he later adapted into Nightbreed. Nightbreed really did feel like sort of an expansion of this. Also, there's a scene at the end of this story, I don't want to give it away, but Barker used a very similar scene in his 1995 film, Lord of Illusions, which was actually based on a short story called The Last Illusion from Volume 6 of this series. But yeah, The Skins of the Fathers I thought was a very good story, but here are Mark's thoughts on this story.
My least favorite story in the collection is The Skins of the Fathers, about these monsters who mated with a woman and she had a child and they got to get it, and the townspeople. I mean, it's an interesting story, and it has all the classic Barker elements. For me, it just didn't work as well as the others.
Now, the final story in the collection is New Murders in the Rue Morgue, and this is sort of a metafiction sequel to the classic Edgar Allan Poe story, Murders in the Rue Morgue. Basically, the main character of this story is supposed to be a descendant of the detective from Murders in the Rue Morgue, who I know was a character from some of Poe's other stories. Basically, this story is playing on the idea that what if Edgar Allan Poe actually based that character off of a real person and based that story off of a real case, but you're not sure if that's actually true or not, or if that's just sort of an apocryphal story that the main character has sort of come to believe over the years. But basically, the story is about an elderly artist whose best friend has been accused of murdering this young girl he's been having an affair with. So this artist decides to play detective and try to figure out if his friend actually did commit this murder or not. And eventually he does find the real killer, and it all ties into the Edgar Allan Poe story. But this was probably my second favorite story in the collection, and it's the Edgar Allan Poe story, but with a very, very Clive Barker twist. Because the twist in the story, or at least what happens at the end of the story, is fucked up, to say the least. But here are Mark's thoughts on New Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Then it ends with New Murders in the Rue Morgue, which is a sort of an homage to Poe, and his murders in the Rue Morgue, and an orangutan who committed these murders, but the ending, sort of flips that on its head a little bit. And it's a fun sort of pastiche kind of a story, paying homage to one of the greats who came before. And I kind of like that. A great short storyteller paying tribute to a great short storyteller from another era. I can see in the future people doing this and paying tribute to Clive Barker stories.
But yeah, Volume 2 of the Books of Blood is a very good short story collection, and it's with these stories where you could definitely see why this 6-volume anthology made such an impact in the world of horror literature at the time.
So, I love Clive Barker short fiction, and you can't go wrong with any of the Books of Blood.
But I hope you enjoyed this video, and that was my review on Books of Blood Volume 2 by Clive Barker, and bye.